The stars had always been painted across the heavens like unreachable jewels, admired but never touched. For centuries, humanity dreamed of walking among them. Yet every leap forward seemed dwarfed by the immensity of the void. But in the year 2234, the impossible finally bent before the iron will of humankind. The Dauntless, a vessel forged in the cradle of Earth and carried on the dreams of millions, pierced the veil of deep space. Its crew, engineers, scientists, and dreamers were not soldiers, not conquerors. They were seekers. Carved into their very bones was the yearning that had carried humanity from caves to cities, from oceans to skies, and now from a single world to the tapestry of stars. At first, the galaxies welcomed them with silence. Nebulae glowed like stained glass. Planets spun in solemn rhythm. The explorers felt as if they had stepped into a cathedral of creation. But silence, they soon learned, was not the same as peace. The first message came as a thunderbolt. Not words, not symbols, but an overwhelming broadcast, an edict. Return to your world. The stars are not yours to walk. You trespass upon dominion far greater than you can grasp. Captain Elias Marr, a man whose steady eyes held the weight of every soul aboard, listened as the message pulsed through the ship. Around him the crew faltered. Fear prickled in their voices. Who sent that? Whispered Linara, the young comms officer. Elias let silence settle before he spoke, his voice measured, unyielding. It seems the universe is not empty. Someone claims it. Someone believes we should bow. They soon learned the name whispered in warning. The Zereth Dominion, a sprawling empire that stretched like shadowed fingers across countless systems. They were called the Tyrants of the Void, ancient, merciless, and absolute. Species after species had bent to their iron grip, offering servitude in exchange for survival. None dared to resist. None until now had been naive or bold enough to wander uninvited into their domain. When the Dauntless refused to turn back, the Zereth arrived. Their ship appeared like a shard of black glass, sharp-edged and immense. Its presence dwarfed the human vessel. With a single gesture, the Zereth captain could have erased them. Yet Elias stood tall on the bridge, watching the alien figure appear across the holographic display. The tyrant's form shimmered with cold elegance. Elongated limbs, eyes like burning coals. A voice that resonated like thunder wrapped in steel. You are human, the alien intoned, almost tasting the word. A species so young that your sun has not even scarred its first billion years. You stand in the Dominion's realm. You will kneel or you will be erased. The crew trembled. Fear coiled through their veins like ice. Here was a being that had enslaved civilizations older than humanity's first fires. Here was a power that had never known defiance. But Elias Marr's reply was not born of calculation or fear. It was born of something older, something carved into the marrow of humankind, the refusal to yield. His voice was calm, yet it struck like iron on stone. We kneel to none. We did not cross the void to bow before new masters. We came to learn, to build, to walk among the stars as equals. If you mean to erase us, then know this. We are not so easily erased. The alien silence was heavy. For the first time in centuries, a voice had not broken beneath their command. For the first time, resistance flickered in the dark. The Zereth captain laughed, a sound sharp and cruel. Then you are fools. And fools burn brightest before they are ash. The transmission ended and the black vessel drifted closer. Humanity had made its spark defiant and unbroken. Whether it would blaze or be smothered was yet unknown. But in that moment, on the fragile deck of the Dauntless, humanity's true journey began. Not just across stars, but into legend. To the Zereth Dominion, humanity was not a marvel. They had seen countless species rise, scatter, and fall to dust. To them, humans were nothing more than a stubborn flame flickering in the wind, a flame the tyrants would gladly snuff out before it grew into a blaze. In the high chamber of the Dominion, where starlight bled through crystal walls and power pulsed like a living force, the sovereigns gathered. These were the masters of entire galaxies, their voices carved in stone, their decisions weighing on the lives of trillions. The news of humanity's defiance had reached them, carried on the words of the captain who had faced resistance. They refused to kneel, hissed Lord Veyron, his form shifting like shadow. Even the Korth bowed after we shattered their moons. Even the proud Ivrathi bent when we crushed their fleets. Yet these, humans barely walking from their cradle, dare speak of equality? High Mistress Shira's eyes glowed with pale fire. It is not equality they speak of. It is arrogance. They do not know the Dominion. They do not fear us yet. The sovereigns debated, their voices rising like storm winds. To them, fear was the oldest weapon, sharper than any blade, heavier than any chain. Entire civilizations had fallen without a single battle, undone by terror alone. But this new species had met fear with defiance, had looked into the abyss and not bowed. That unsettled the tyrants in ways they refused to admit aloud. Still, the Dominion decided. A display of power would be made. Humanity would be reminded of its place in the cosmic order, on its knees. Back aboard the Dauntless, the crew braced for that reminder. For days, the black Zereth ship shadowed them, a predator circling prey. Its size and silence gnawed at their nerves. Lenara, the comms officer, confessed her fear in whispers. We're nothing to them. One shot and Earth never even knows what happened to us. But Captain Elias Marr refused to spare. He spoke to his crew in the quiet hours, his voice steady as steel. They believe fear rules all. But fear is a choice, and humanity has never been one to choose chains over hope. Hope, fragile yet unbreakable, became their anchor. They sent transmissions home, messages wrapped in courage: do not bow. Do not surrender. If they come, we must endure. On Earth, those messages were received with awe. Ordinary people, farmers, workers, children, heard the defiance of the Dauntless and felt something awaken within. Humanity had faced tyrants before, not of stars but of their own kind. And every time, though bloodied and scarred, they had endured. The idea that alien masters could cow them felt almost laughable to those who remembered their history. But the Zereth did not laugh. Instead, the tyrants made their move. The black vessel descended into a human colony on Europa, shrouding the icy plains in shadow. With terrible precision, they unleashed their power, not to annihilate but to demonstrate. Towers crumbled, machines burned. Fields of ice cracked and boiled under weapons humanity had no name for. Yet the Zereth spared the people, corralling them into submission, demanding they kneel before the Dominion's banner. Many did. Their fear was real, their weakness human. Mothers shielded children, elders wept, and workers bowed beneath the alien gaze. The Zereth thought victory was certain, but among the crowd rose voices, small, trembling, yet unbroken. A child no older than 10 stood beside her father and whispered, "We don't kneel, do we?" Her father, weary and bruised, lifted his head. "No, my child, we never kneel." Others followed. Some stood silent, their spines stiffening. Some spoke words of refusal. And though fear clawed at their hearts, something greater began to burn. The spark Elias had lit aboard the Dauntless. The Zereth watched. For the first time in centuries, their gaze faltered. Not because humanity had power, not because humanity had weapons, but because they saw a truth they had long forgotten. Will itself could be a weapon. The tyrants left Europa scarred but not broken. In their departure, whispers spread like wildfire. Across colonies, across Earth itself, the message rang clear: we kneel to none. The Zereth Dominion had gazed upon humanity, and though they saw only frailty, something deeper unsettled them. For weakness that refuses to bow is no weakness at all. It is strength of a kind they could not control. And in that realization, the first threads of fear wove into the hearts of the tyrants. Fear rippled across Earth and her colonies after Europa's devastation, but it did not chain them. If anything, the scars carved into the ice moon became a rallying mark, a wound that refused to close quietly. Humanity, as fragile as it was, discovered a new resolve in its shared defiance. The Zereth Dominion expected humanity to break, as so many before had broken. They had destroyed cities, shattered fleets, and left empires in ruins with but a flick of their hand. Yet here, after their first demonstration of power, the humans still whispered resistance. The Dominion did not understand it, but they dismissed it all the same. What was defiance without strength? What were words without weapons? But humanity was never defined by what it lacked. It was defined by what it built. On Mars, deep beneath the red dust and rock, engineers worked tirelessly. They studied the fragments of Zereth tech left behind after Europa's raid, piecing together shards of alien alloys with stubborn curiosity. They could not match the tyrant's strength, not yet, but they could learn, adapt, and forge something uniquely human. For weeks they worked in secrecy, feeding on the belief that even the smallest act of rebellion could ignite hope. Captain Elias Marr and the Dauntless became symbols of this flame. Their survival against the Zereth shadow ship was whispered across settlements. In crowded mess halls and quiet bunkers, people retold his words, "We kneel to none." Those words, simple and sharp, wove into the soul of humanity. The first act of true defiance came not from fleets or armies, but from a group of miners on Titan. When a Zereth patrol descended to extract tribute, food, minerals, and labor, the miners refused. Armed with nothing but drills, cutters, and the courage of desperation, they blocked the tyrant's advance. The Zereth captain, tall and terrible, commanded them to kneel. The leader of the miners, an old woman named Sarah, stood with her weathered hands gripping a rusted tool. Her voice, though cracked with age, carried clear. "We've bent our backs to earth, to hunger, to storms, to wars. But we will not bend to you. If you mean to take, then take our lives with it, for we do not kneel." Her words were followed by silence, broken only by the hum of alien weapons. Yet behind her, dozens of miners lifted their tools, standing shoulder to shoulder. None of them soldiers, none of them trained, but each of them willing. The Zereth had seen defiance before, but always from fleets, from armies, from powers that believed themselves strong. To face such resolve from unarmed miners, from ordinary people who knew death was certain, struck them with something unfamiliar. For the first time in ages, they hesitated. It was only a breath, a pause. But humanity seized it. One of the miners hurled a charge, an explosive meant for tunneling ice. The blast tore through the frozen ground, sending shards into the air. It did little damage to the Zereth, but it was enough to send their patrol retreating, unsettled by the madness of a people who would rather die on their feet than live on their knees. The event spread like wildfire. Titan's defiance echoed across the colonies, and with it came a truth the Dominion had long tried to bury. The power of will was contagious. For every colony the tyrants sought to break, another rose in refusal. Farmers on Ganymede refused to give grain. Shipwrights on Luna sabotaged tribute vessels. Even children painted words of resistance on walls. "We kneel to none." The Dominion's gaze sharpened. They had seen uprisings before, and they had crushed them without effort. But never had an uprising spread like this, not fueled by armies, but by ordinary lives bound by one unshakable conviction. Back on the Dauntless, Elias Marr listened as the stories reached him. His crew, weary and afraid, found strength in the miners of Titan and the whispers of children who refused to bow. Elias gathered them in the command deck and said, with a fire in his eyes, "This is not about fleets. This is not about power. This is about the human spirit, and the tyrants will never understand it until it consumes them." For the first time, the Dominion realized they were not facing another empire to conquer. They were facing something more dangerous, a species too stubborn to kneel, too iron-willed to surrender. And so the first defiance was written, not in bloodless treaties, but in the hearts of humanity. The galaxy had taken notice. The tyrants had begun to fear. The Dominion had underestimated humanity. Where other species fractured under terror, humanity seemed to grow stronger with each wound. The scars of Europa, the defiance on Titan, these were not weights dragging them down, but sparks that lit fires across the colonies. And fire, once kindled, is hard to contain. The Zereth responded as they always had, with force. Warships descended upon Mars, choking the skies in black shadows. Their demands were clear: deliver resources, surrender leaders, and kneel or face annihilation. The people of Mars trembled. They had no fleets, no weapons to match. Yet beneath the surface, in secret caverns carved into the red stone, something had been waiting. Engineers, dreamers, and rebels had labored in silence, reverse engineering scraps of alien alloy from Europa's ruins. Their work was crude, imperfect, but driven by desperation and brilliance. The first human-forged rail cannon, stitched together with alien fragments and human ingenuity, waited in the tunnels. When the Zereth descended, expecting submission, Mars answered differently. The cannons roared. The skies lit with streaks of metal and fire as the first human-made weapons capable of piercing Zereth shields found their mark. One warship faltered, its black hull torn by a rail slug before retreating into orbit. Humanity had drawn blood. On the surface, cheers erupted across settlements. Ordinary citizens who had once whispered in fear now stood openly, their voices echoing through dusty streets. We kneel to none. The Dominion reeled. No world had ever scarred their fleets so soon after contact. Fear rippled, not among humans but among the tyrants themselves. The sovereigns gathered in their high chamber, their voices sharp with unease. They learned too quickly, hissed Lord Veyron. Others we conquered because they could not adapt. But these humans, they take what they touch and make it their own. They are fragile, another insisted. One blow to their world and they will fall. But High Mistress Shira shook her head, her pale eyes narrowing. No, they are iron in spirit, if not in flesh. Each chain we lay upon them only breaks, and broken chains spread. Her words proved prophetic. Across the colonies, chains did break. Where Zereth patrols demanded tribute, workers sabotaged shipments. Where tyrants tried to seize laborers, uprisings flared. In silence, in shadows, and sometimes in open daylight, humanity resisted. It was not victory, not yet. They lost lives. Cities burned. Families were torn apart. Grief weighed heavy. But even in mourning there was no submission. Widows raised banners in place of their fallen. Children learned to whisper resistance as lullabies. Humanity wept, but it wept standing. On Earth, leaders gathered in emergency councils. Fear tugged at them, urging caution, compromise, surrender. But the voices of the people thundered louder. Broadcasts from Titan, Mars, and Europa spread across the homeworld, showing not just destruction but resilience. Humanity's leaders realized what the people already knew. There could be no chains without willing hands to wear them. It was then that Captain Elias Mars stood before the council, his face worn by hardship, his eyes still alight with fire. You speak of fear, he told them, but fear is their weapon and it breaks when we refuse to wield it. They can burn our cities, yes. They can kill our people, yes. But they cannot chain our will. And as long as that will burns, humanity cannot be conquered. The chamber fell silent. The truth was undeniable. Humanity's strength was not its fleets nor its weapons, but its refusal to surrender, its iron spirit that no tyrant could bend. Thus, a decision was made. Humanity would not beg for peace. It would not kneel for mercy. It would rise no matter the cost. And so the whispers of rebellion became a roar. Across Earth and the colonies, banners of resistance unfurled. Engineers labored day and night. Soldiers trained with grim determination. Families vowed to endure. The Zereth Dominion, long feared as eternal and unbreakable, now faced something they had never known, a foe that refused its chains. And in the breaking of those chains, humanity's destiny shifted. They were no longer wanderers among stars. They were challengers to empires, bearers of defiance, wielders of unbreakable will. The tyrants had awoken something they could not control, and humanity had only just begun. The Zereth Dominion had ruled for millennia, confident that no resistance could outlast their wrath. But humanity was different. Where other species crumbled under fear, humans transformed fear into fuel. Every world they scarred only sharpened humanity's resolve, and every life lost became a reason to fight harder. The tyrants, unsettled, decided to end it swiftly. They chose a target not for its strategic value but for its symbolism: Mars. The red world where humanity first scarred a Zereth warship had become the beacon of rebellion. If Mars fell, they believed the flame of defiance would gutter out. So the Dominion came, not with patrols, not with warnings, but with a fleet. Black warships blotted out the stars, a storm of steel and shadow. Their message was simple: kneel or burn. On Mars, there was no illusion of safety. Families huddled in shelters. Engineers prayed over their crude weapons. Miners gripped tools turned into makeshift arms. Soldiers, too few and too poorly armed, stood ready to defend their homes. Fear weighed on every heart, but not despair. Captain Elias Marr arrived aboard the Dauntless, battered but unbroken. His presence alone steadied the defenders. When he stood on the surface of Mars facing a crowd of thousands, his voice carried across the wind-swept plains. They think Mars will kneel. They think we are fragile. They think they can break us with fire. But look around you, every stone, every scar, every life here says otherwise. We are not their prey. We are humanity, and today we show the galaxy what that means, the crowd roared. Ordinary people, weary and afraid, felt strength return to their bones. They were not soldiers, but they were something more. Humans with nothing left to lose but their freedom. When the Zereth descended, their ships unleashing storms of plasma, the defenders answered with everything they had. Rail cannons thundered, missiles streaked into the skies, and crude fighters swarmed against impossible odds. The ground shook, the skies burned, but Mars did not kneel. Hours bled into days. The battle was hopeless on paper. Human losses were heavy, settlements burned. Yet every time a Zereth warship struck, another pocket of resistance rose. Families passed weapons from fallen hands to living ones. Engineers jury-rigged broken cannons in the midst of fire. Children carried water to the front lines. Humanity fought not as an army, but as a people. The Dauntless became the heart of the stand. Elias Marr commanded from its bridge, refusing to retreat even as the ship groaned under endless barrages. His crew, though exhausted, matched his resolve. If we fall, he told them, let us fall standing so the galaxy remembers. And the galaxy was watching. Word spread through hidden networks, through whispers carried faster than the Dominion could silence. Across enslaved worlds, oppressed peoples listened as Mars stood unbroken against the storm. For the first time in centuries, the tyrant's aura of invincibility cracked. The Zereth commanders grew frustrated. How could such a young species resist so long? How could flesh and stone hold against fleets that had crushed empires? Rage consumed them, and they poured more fire upon Mars. But still, humanity endured. The climax came when the flagship of the Zereth fleet descended low, intent on delivering the killing blow. Its weapons glowed, ready to scorch the red world into silence. Elias Marr made his choice. The Dauntless, wounded and dying, turned its last strength against the flagship. With engines burning white and weapons screaming, it hurled itself forward. The collision lit the skies like a second sun. The Zereth flagship staggered, torn open, crippled in full view of both Mars and the watching stars. The Dauntless was lost, but its sacrifice became legend. Silence fell. The Dominion fleet, shaken by the sight of a human vessel bringing down their mightiest warship, hesitated. That hesitation grew into retreat. For the first time in their reign, the tyrants withdrew from a battlefield, not because they were defeated in strength, but because they were defeated in will. Mars stood, battered, scarred, grieving but unyielding, and across the galaxy whispers spread like wildfire. The tyrants can bleed. The tyrants can fall. The unyielding stand had been written in fire and sacrifice. And humanity, though bloodied, had carved its place into the stars. The galaxy had always looked upon the Zereth Dominion with trembling silence. Their power was unquestioned, their cruelty legendary. Worlds surrendered before the first shot was fired, because to resist the Dominion was to embrace annihilation. For millennia, that was the law of the stars. But Mars changed everything. The stand of humanity, fragile, desperate yet unyielding, had shown what no one dared to believe. The tyrants were not invincible. The fall of their flagship, crippled by the sacrifice of the Dauntless, spread across the stars like a beacon in the dark. For the first time in living memory, the galaxy whispered not of the Dominion's strength, but of its weakness. In the high chamber, the sovereigns seethed. Their voices shook the crystalline walls as they argued. "This is blasphemy," Lord Veyron thundered. "A child species dares to defy us, and in doing so inspires others." "Already whispers stir in the Ivrathi and the Korth. If they rise, the Dominion trembles." "They are nothing," spat another. "One fleet, one strike, and they will be ashes." But High Mistress Shira's voice was colder than silence. "Ashes do not frighten. Will frightens, and will cannot be burned so easily. Humanity has taught the stars to hope. The word, hope, was like poison to the Dominion. Hope was dangerous, infectious. A single spark could spread through oppressed worlds faster than fire through dry grass. And indeed it had begun. Across the galaxy, slaves who had bowed for centuries now whispered humanity's words. We kneel to none. Fear, once the Dominion's greatest weapon, had begun to turn against them. Meanwhile, on Earth, grief and pride walked hand in hand. The loss of Captain Elias Marr and the Dauntless weighed heavily, yet his sacrifice had not been in vain. His name became a rallying cry. Statues were raised, songs were sung, and children learned his final words as if they were scripture. If we fall, let us fall standing. Humanity did not see themselves as conquerors. They did not yet dream of empires, but they understood something the Zereth could not. To endure, even bloodied and broken, was victory enough. On the colonies, the people worked with renewed fervor. Engineers pushed their limits, forging weapons from scraps of alien tech. Pilots trained with reckless determination, willing to fly into impossible odds. Farmers dug deeper, miners worked longer, builders carved shelters out of ruins. Every act of survival became an act of defiance. The Zereth, enraged, launched raids across multiple worlds. But the more they struck, the more resistance spread. No longer did the people cower when ships blackened their skies. Instead, they spat defiantly into the face of terror. Even when villages were razed, survivors carved words into the rubble. We kneel to none. The Dominion began to realize a truth they had long forgotten. Strength alone could not rule forever. The breaking point came when whispers of defiance reached not just slaves, but lesser vassal species within the Dominion's own ranks. The Evrathi, long subdued, began to sing human songs in secret. The Korth, whose moons had been shattered into compliance, painted humanity's emblem on their walls. The Dominion's iron grip had cracks, and those cracks spread faster than they could be mended. The sovereigns were shaken. In secret, they began to speak of humanity not with scorn but with dread. They should not be possible, one muttered. They are young. They are weak, yet they defy us still. Not weak, Shira corrected. Iron-willed. And iron shatters stone. And so for the first time in millennia, the tyrants knew fear. Not fear of fleets or weapons. Not fear of conquest. But fear of something far more dangerous, the human spirit. For every blow struck against them, humanity grew stronger. For every life lost, another stood taller. For every chain laid, another shattered. The Dominion had built its reign on the assumption that all would eventually kneel. But humanity had proven the unthinkable, that there was a species who would rather burn than bow. And if such defiance spread through the stars, the Dominion's rule might not simply tremble, it might fall. As the sovereigns stared into the darkness of their empire, the question that haunted them was no longer when will humanity kneel. It was what if humanity never does? The stars had always seemed eternal, ruled by the unshakable Dominion. Yet eternity, humanity proved, could tremble. The defiance of one fragile species had spread across the galaxy like wildfire, and where once there was silence and submission, now there was courage. The loss of Captain Elias Marr and the Dauntless weighed heavily, but his sacrifice did not vanish into void. It echoed. His words, carried on the winds of broken worlds, grew louder with each retelling. On colonies and enslaved planets alike, people whispered them as prayers, shouted them as banners. If we fall, let us fall standing. The Zereth Dominion struck again and again, desperate to extinguish the blaze. Their fleets ravaged colonies. Their edicts threatened entire systems. But every strike that fell only fanned the flames higher. Humanity did not stop. Humanity did not bow. And for every world they scarred, another voice joined the chorus of resistance. On Earth, the cradle of humankind, leaders finally set aside divisions. Nations that had once quarreled over borders and pride now stood united beneath one banner: survival, freedom, and will. A fleet began to rise, not vast, not mighty, but forged with hands and hearts that refused to yield. Every ship was named after those who had stood first in defiance: Titan, Europa, Mars, and above all, Dauntless. The galaxy watched in awe. Other species, long cowed into submission, began to stir. Secretly at first, then openly, they echoed humanity's cry. The Evrathi rose in song, their voices shaking slave chains from their throats. The Korth took up arms with tools and fire, declaring that if humans could bleed the tyrants, so could they. What had begun as a whisper from a fragile world now thundered across the stars. The Zereth, once masters of fear, now tasted it themselves. They looked upon humanity and saw not weakness but contagion. This species was dangerous not because of its strength, but because of its refusal to break, and that refusal spread. On Mars, where ruins still smoldered from the Great Stand, a child knelt beside her father's grave. She traced her small fingers across the name etched in stone and whispered, "We never kneel, Father." Not ever. Around her others gathered, heads bowed not in submission but in remembrance. Their grief did not bind them, it forged them into steel. In the Dominion's high chamber silence reigned. The sovereigns, once certain of their eternal dominion, now quarreled in fear. Lord Varen snarled for annihilation, for the burning of Earth itself. But even he trembled at the thought. For if Earth burned and yet humanity refused to bow, what then? What weapon could silence a will that would not die? High Mistress Shira, the coldest among them, spoke words no tyrant had dared admit for millennia. Perhaps the age of dominion ends not with fleets, but with defiance, and it is humanity who writes the end. The thought shook them more than any battle. But for humanity, the path was never about ending empires. It was about survival. It was about standing free beneath the stars, no matter the cost. They did not claim to be invincible. They did not claim to be flawless. They claimed only this, that they would never kneel. Generations later, when the story of those days was told, the names of battles and the scars of worlds blurred with time. But what endured was the spirit. Children across liberated planets grew up reciting the same vow, their voices bright and unyielding. We kneel to none. And so the legend of humanity grew. Not as conquerors, not as rulers, but as the iron-willed species who taught the galaxy that chains could be broken. The tyrants had sought to erase them, but instead had birthed their legacy. A legacy carved not in power, but in resilience. The stars themselves seemed to listen. Where once they glimmered cold and unreachable, now they shone with promise. Humanity, fragile yet unbreakable, had stepped into that vast expanse and declared their truth. And though the future remained uncertain, one thing was written into the marrow of every soul. Humanity would fall someday. All things do. But if they fell, it would be standing. Always standing.